Most businesses do not fail because their founders are lazy, unintelligent, or unwilling to work hard. Many fail after months or even years of intense effort. Teams build products, spend money, hire employees, create detailed plans, and work long hours, only to discover that customers do not want what they have made. The painful truth is that effort alone does not guarantee progress. A startup can be extremely busy and still be moving in the wrong direction. Traditional business thinking often begins with a plan. The company studies the market, predicts future demand, designs a complete product, prepares a launch strategy, and then begins execution. This approach can work when the environment is stable and the customer's needs are already understood. A large company selling a familiar product may be able to rely on past data and predictable demand. A startup cannot. A startup operates in uncertainty. It is trying to create something new, serve customers in a new way, or build a business model that has not yet been proven. At the beginning, the founders do not truly know who the best customers will be, which features they will value, how much they will pay, or whether they will use the product at all. These are not small details. They are the foundation of the entire business. Yet many entrepreneurs treat their assumptions as facts. They believe they understand the customer because they have done research, spoken with friends, or received positive feedback about the idea. They begin building a polished product based on those early beliefs. Months later, after finally launching, they discover that real customer behavior is very different from what they expected. This creates one of the most dangerous situations in entrepreneurship. The company successfully executes a plan that should never have been followed. The team meets deadlines, stays within budget, and completes the product exactly as designed. From a traditional management perspective, this may look like success. From the customer's perspective, it may be completely irrelevant. The central question for a startup is therefore not simply whether it can build a product. Modern technology makes it possible to build almost anything. The more important question is whether the company should build it. Will customers use it? Will they pay for it? Will it solve a meaningful problem? Can the idea become a sustainable business? These questions cannot be answered through planning alone. They require evidence. A startup needs a way to test its beliefs quickly, learn from real customers, and change direction before too much time and money have been wasted. This is the foundation of the lean startup approach. The word lean does not mean cheap, small, or unwilling to invest. It does not mean creating low-quality products or avoiding ambition. It means removing waste from the process of building a business. In a startup, the greatest form of waste is not spending too much money on office furniture or marketing. The greatest waste is building something that nobody wants. The solution is to treat every startup idea as a collection of assumptions that must be tested. Founders usually begin with two critical beliefs. The first is that the product creates real value for customers. The second is that the company can grow in a sustainable way. Until these beliefs are proven through customer behavior, they remain hypotheses. Instead of spending years perfecting an untested idea, the company creates the simplest version of the product that can produce useful learning. It places that early version in front of real customers, observes what they do, measures the results, and uses the evidence to decide what should happen next. This process is not about asking customers whether they like an idea. People often say they would use a product and then behave differently when it becomes available. Real learning comes from actions. Do customers sign up? Do they return? Do they pay? Do they recommend the product? Do they stop using it after one attempt? These behaviors reveal more than compliments, opinions, or survey responses. The goal is not to launch an imperfect product simply for the sake of speed. The goal is to begin learning as early as possible. Every feature, design choice, marketing message, and pricing decision should help test an important assumption. Work that does not produce useful learning may feel productive, but it can still be waste. This changes the meaning of progress. In a traditional company, progress may be measured through completed tasks, product features, revenue targets, or deadlines. In a startup, these measures can be misleading. A team may add dozens of features while remaining completely uncertain about whether customers care. Real progress in a startup is validated learning. This means discovering, through evidence, what customers actually need and what type of business can serve them successfully. Learning is not an excuse for failure or a positive interpretation of disappointing results. It must be supported by data that changes future decisions. The process follows a continuous cycle. The startup builds something that tests an assumption, measures how customers respond, and learns whether the original belief was correct. That learning then influences the next version of the product. The cycle repeats again and again. The faster the company can move through this cycle, the less time it spends operating on untested beliefs. Speed matters because startups have limited resources. Every company has a finite amount of time before it runs out of money, support, or energy. The purpose of the lean startup method is to help the company learn enough to build a sustainable business before those resources disappear. This approach also challenges the popular image of the entrepreneur as a visionary who succeeds by refusing to listen to anyone. Determination is important, but stubbornness can become dangerous when it prevents learning. A founder must hold a strong vision of the future while remaining flexible about how that vision will be achieved. The original plan may be wrong. The customer segment may need to change. The product may solve a different problem than expected. The pricing model may not work. The company may need to simplify, reposition, or completely redesign its approach. Changing direction is not always a sign of weakness. When supported by evidence, it can be one of the most disciplined decisions a company makes. At the same time, constant change without learning is equally dangerous. A startup should not abandon its direction every time it receives criticism or experiences a difficult week. It needs a structured method for deciding whether to continue with the existing strategy or make a significant change. That decision depends on meaningful measurement. Startups often focus on numbers that look impressive but reveal very little. Total website visits, downloads, registered users, or social media attention may increase while the business remains unhealthy. These numbers can create the illusion of momentum. Useful measurements connect specific actions to customer behavior. They show whether a change improved retention, increased conversion, reduced customer loss, or strengthened growth. Good data helps the team decide what to do. Bad data only makes the team feel successful. The ideas that follow are built around a simple principle. Entrepreneurship can be managed as a disciplined process of experimentation and learning. Innovation does not have to depend entirely on luck, instinct, or perfect prediction. A startup can reduce uncertainty by testing its assumptions, measuring real behavior, and adapting before failure becomes unavoidable. The goal is not merely to create products faster. It is to discover as efficiently as possible what should be built, who it should serve, and how it can become a business that lasts. A startup is often imagined as a small group of people working in a garage, surrounded by computers, whiteboards, coffee cups, and ambitious ideas. This image captures part of the reality, but it can also create a misunderstanding. A startup is not defined by its size, location, industry, or level of funding. It is defined by the conditions under which it operates. A startup is a human organization attempting to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. This definition matters because it changes the way entrepreneurship should be understood. A startup could be a newly formed technology company, but it can also exist inside a large corporation, a nonprofit organization, a government department, or a long-established family business. Whenever a team is trying to develop something genuinely new without knowing exactly who will use it, how customers will respond, or whether the business model will work, that team is operating like a startup. The uncertainty surrounding a startup makes traditional management difficult. Conventional management systems are designed to organize work in environments where the destination is already known. Managers create forecasts, budgets, deadlines, production schedules, and performance targets. They divide large goals into smaller tasks and ensure that people complete those tasks efficiently. This works well when the organization knows what it is producing and understands a market in which it operates. A factory manufacturing a familiar product can estimate demand using historical data. A retailer opening another branch can study the performance of its existing stores. A company improving an established service can compare results with previous years. These organizations still face risks, but many of the most important parts of their business are understood. A startup does not have that advantage. It may have a detailed business plan, but the plan is based largely on predictions. The founders may believe they know who the customers are, what problem those customers face, how the product should solve it, and how the company will make money. Yet, until real customers begin using the product, these beliefs remain assumptions. The danger begins when founders treat these assumptions as reliable facts. They may create long-term plans based on market estimates, customer surveys, and financial projections. The documents may look professional, and the numbers may appear precise, but precision does not remove uncertainty. A forecast can calculate future revenue down to the last dollar, while still being based on a completely incorrect understanding of customer behavior. Traditional management often asks whether a project is being completed according to plan. Startup management must first ask whether the plan deserves to be completed. This is a very different responsibility. Efficient execution is valuable only when the organization is moving in a useful direction. If the original assumptions are wrong, greater efficiency simply allows the team to waste resources more quickly. This does not mean that startups should reject management. Many entrepreneurs have reacted against rigid corporate systems by believing that innovation requires complete freedom. They assume that planning, measurement, accountability, and structure will destroy creativity. According to this view, a startup should simply hire talented people, give them space, and allow good ideas to emerge naturally. But the absence of management does not create innovation. It often creates confusion. Teams may work intensely without knowing which activities matter. Features are added because someone believes they are exciting. Marketing campaigns are launched without clear goals. Product changes are made in response to individual opinions. When results disappoint, nobody knows whether the problem came from the idea, the execution, the target market, the pricing, or the measurement system. A startup therefore needs management, but it needs a form of management designed for uncertainty. Its purpose is not merely to keep employees busy or ensure that a predetermined plan is followed. Its purpose is to help the organization discover what kind of product and business model can actually succeed. This changes the role of the entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is not simply having an idea or taking a financial risk. It is a form of management. The entrepreneur must organize people, resources, experiments, and decisions around the process of learning. The central responsibility is to move the startup from uncertain assumptions toward tested knowledge. This requires discipline because uncertainty encourages two opposite mistakes. The first is excessive planning. Founders may delay contact with customers while attempting to design the perfect product. They spend months refining features, creating forecasts, preparing marketing materials, and solving technical problems. They feel productive because the team is constantly working, but they have not yet tested whether the product matters to anyone. The second mistake is careless action. Some teams release products rapidly, make constant changes, and celebrate speed without establishing what they're trying to learn. They believe that movement itself is progress. Yet random experimentation can waste as much time as excessive planning. A test is useful only when it is connected to a clear assumption and produces information that can guide the next decision. Effective startup management exists between these extremes. It replaces rigid prediction with structured experimentation. The company still has a vision, but it treats the strategy for reaching that vision as something that must be tested. It does not abandon planning entirely. It uses plans as hypotheses rather than promises. The vision represents the future the founders hope to create. It may involve changing how people communicate, shop, work, travel, learn, manage money, receive health care, or solve another important problem. This vision should be stable enough to give the company direction. Without it, the team may react to every new opinion and lose its sense of purpose. The strategy describes how the company believes it can make that vision real. It includes the target customers, the product design, the pricing model, the distribution method, the technology, and the expected source of growth. Unlike the vision, the strategy must remain flexible because many of its elements are uncertain. The product is a practical expression of the strategy. It changes most frequently because each version should reflect what the startup has learned. The vision may remain consistent while the strategy changes several times, and the product may change even more often. This allows the founders to remain committed without becoming trapped by their first plan. A startup's early ideas usually contain two assumptions that are especially important. One concerns value. The founders believe that customers will receive meaningful benefit from the product. The other concerns growth. They believe that the company can attract new customers and build a sustainable business. The value assumption asks whether people truly find the product useful. It cannot be proven by showing that the product can be built or by collecting compliments. Customers may praise an idea without changing their behavior. The real question is whether they use the product in an expected way, return to it, pay for it, recommend it, or make it part of their lives. The growth assumption asks how the startup will reach more customers after the first group has been served. Some products grow because existing users continue using them. Others grow because customers recommend them to friends. Some depend on advertising or paid acquisition. A company may create value for a small number of people while still lacking a practical way to expand. Both assumptions must eventually be tested. In the early stages, the startup should identify the assumptions that could destroy the business if they prove false. These are the beliefs that deserve attention first. A team may face hundreds of questions, but not all questions are equally important. The color of a button, the wording of a minor feature, or the design of an internal system may matter eventually. But those details are secondary if the company has not yet established that customers care about the basic product. This is why startup management is not about trying to perfect everything at once. It is about directing limited resources toward the most important uncertainties. Every startup has a limited amount of time, money, attention, and energy. These resources form its runway. Runway is often measured in months, meaning the amount of time before the company runs out of money. But a more useful way to understand runway is through the number of meaningful opportunities the company has left to test its strategy. A startup that spends 6 months building one untested product may have used half of its financial runway while completing only one learning cycle. Another startup with the same amount of money may test several important assumptions during that period. The second company is not merely moving faster. It is gaining more opportunities to discover a workable direction before its resources disappear. The goal is therefore not to preserve money by avoiding action. It is to use resources in a way that produces the greatest amount of useful learning. Spending can be justified when it helps answer an important question. Saving money is not automatically lean if the company is also avoiding the evidence it needs. The same principle applies to large organizations. A well-funded company may have enough money to continue an unsuccessful project for years. Its financial runway appears long, but its learning process may be weak. Teams can hide behind budgets, internal approval systems, and impressive activity reports. Because the organization is large, failure may take longer to become visible. Startups inside established companies face another difficulty. Traditional departments are usually judged by predictable performance. Managers are rewarded for delivering results according to forecasts. Innovation projects cannot honestly provide the same certainty. When leaders demand or cite predictions from teams working on improving ideas, those teams may create unrealistic forecasts simply to receive approval. A better approach is to hold innovation teams accountable for learning. They should clearly state their assumptions, design tests, measure customer behavior, and demonstrate whether their understanding is improving. This does not remove responsibility. It creates a more appropriate form of responsibility for uncertain work. The first major measure of progress is not how much has been built, but how much uncertainty has been reduced. This is where the idea of validated learning becomes central. Startups often use the word learning after something goes wrong. A product fails, money is lost, and the team explains that the experience taught valuable lessons. Sometimes this is true, but the word can also become an excuse. Learning is not automatically valuable simply because it follows failure. A company can repeat the same mistakes, misread the evidence, or create explanations that protect the original idea. Genuine learning must be demonstrated. It must show that the organization has discovered something important about customers, the product, or the business model, and that this discovery will influence what happens next. Validated learning is supported by real evidence. It comes from testing an idea and observing customer behavior. The purpose is not to prove that the founders were right. It is to find out what is true. This distinction is difficult because people naturally become attached to their ideas. Founders may have spent years imagining a product before creating the company. They may have invested personal savings, persuaded friends to join, and promised investors that the idea has enormous potential. Under these conditions, negative evidence can feel like a personal attack. Teams may respond by searching for numbers that make the situation look better. They emphasize how many people visited the website, how many accounts were created, how much media attention the launch received, or how rapidly total users increased. These figures may be encouraging, but they do not necessarily show whether the business is working. A startup can attract thousands of curious visitors, while failing to create lasting value. It can collect registrations from people who never return. It can receive positive publicity, while generating little revenue. It can report rising total users, even though most customers have stopped using the product. Validated learning requires measurements that reveal the relationship between the startup's actions and customer responses. The company must be able to say what it believed, what it changed, what happened afterward, and what the results mean for the strategy. This process begins by making assumptions visible. Many teams do not realize how much of their work depends on beliefs that have never been clearly stated. One person assumes that customers care most about convenience. Another assumes that low price is the main attraction. A designer believes users want simplicity, while a salesperson believes they want advanced features. Because these assumptions remain hidden, the team cannot test them directly. Writing down the main hypotheses creates clarity. The startup might state that a particular group of customers has a specific problem, that the problem is serious enough to motivate action, and that the proposed product offers a valuable solution. It might also state how those customers would discover the product, how much they are willing to pay, and what behavior would demonstrate continued interest. The next step is to find the smallest practical way to test these beliefs. The company does not need to build a complete vision before collecting evidence. It needs to create an experiment that allows customers to respond. An experiment is more useful than a debate. Inside a startup, intelligent people can argue endlessly about what customers will want. Each person can support an opinion with logic, experience, or market research. But until customers behave in the real world, the argument remains unresolved. The goal of experimentation is not to remove judgment. Data does not interpret itself, and customer behavior can be confusing. The goal is to replace unsupported certainty with evidence. Founders still need insight and vision, but those qualities become more effective when combined with disciplined testing. Consider a team that believes customers want a new online service. The team could spend a year building a complete platform with accounts, payment systems, automated features, customer dashboards, and advanced design. Alternatively, it could create a simple version that offers the central benefit to a small group of early customers. The simpler version may require employees to perform some tasks manually. It may lack the polished appearance the founders eventually want. Yet if it allows customers to experience the main value, it can reveal whether the underlying assumption is correct. If customers are uninterested even when the service is provided personally, building expensive automation will not solve the problem. Early tests should focus on what customers do rather than what they claim they might do. Interviews and surveys can help reveal problems, language, and expectations, but they have limitations. People often want to appear supportive. They may say that an idea sounds useful because they do not want to disappoint the founder. They may also misjudge their own future behavior. A stronger signal appears when the customer must make a meaningful commitment. This commitment might involve paying money, giving time, sharing personal information, changing an existing habit, inviting colleagues, or returning repeatedly. The greater the required effort, the stronger the evidence that the product has value. This does not mean that every early test must immediately generate revenue. Some products depend on long development cycles, network effects, regulatory approval, or gradual adoption. The appropriate evidence differs across industries. But every startup should identify behavior that would support or challenge its key beliefs. Eric Ries developed many of these ideas through his own entrepreneurial experiences. In one early company, he and his colleagues worked intensely to create a product they believed customers would want. They invested heavily in technology and completed a major launch. Yet the expected customers did not appear. From one perspective, the team had accomplished something impressive. It had built a functioning product under difficult conditions. From another perspective, much of the effort had created no value because the product had been based on incorrect assumptions. The experience revealed an uncomfortable question: which activities had actually contributed to understanding the customer? Many technical achievements had felt essential during development, but after the product failed to attract users, it became clear that much of the work had not helped answer the most important business questions. This realization is central to the idea of waste. In manufacturing, waste includes excess inventory, unnecessary movement, defects, delays, and work that does not create value for the customer. In entrepreneurship, waste often takes the form of features nobody uses, products nobody buys, reports nobody needs, and plans based on assumptions nobody has tested. A feature may be technically excellent and still be wasteful. The quality of the engineering does not guarantee customer value. This can be difficult for skilled professionals to accept. Engineers want to build reliable systems. Designers want to create polished experiences. Managers want detailed plans. Marketers want strong campaigns. Each activity may be performed well, while the overall startup remains disconnected from customer needs. Validated learning provides a way to judge whether these activities contribute to progress. The question is not simply whether the work was completed successfully. The question is whether the work helped establish a sustainable business. This does not lower the importance of quality. It changes when and where quality should be applied. A startup should not deliberately create something unsafe, dishonest, or incapable of testing the central idea. But it should also avoid spending months perfecting elements that customers may not value. The founder's definition of quality may differ from the customer's definition. A team may believe that an early product is embarrassing because it lacks advanced features. Customers may value it because it solves one painful problem simply and quickly. In another case, the team may admire the product's technical sophistication, while customers find it confusing. Early customers are particularly important because they often tolerate imperfections in exchange for receiving a solution sooner. They are not representative of the entire future market, but they can help reveal whether the basic value exists. Their feedback and behavior give the startup a starting point for improvement. The company should be careful not to confuse individual requests with universal demand. One customer may ask for a feature that only that person needs. Another may dislike an element that most users value. Validated learning comes from identifying patterns rather than reacting blindly to every comment. The startup must also separate what customers say from what its measurements show. A user may complain about a design, but continue using the product every day. Another may praise the service and never return. Both forms of information matter, but behavior usually provides stronger evidence about value. As evidence accumulates, the team begins to develop a clearer model of the business. It learns which customers experience the problem most strongly, which parts of the solution matter, what prevents adoption, and what encourages continued use. These discoveries may confirm parts of the original vision while challenging others. This is why learning should occur early, before the organization becomes too committed to one approach. As a company grows, its systems, reputation, contracts, employee roles, and investor expectations make change more difficult. Early flexibility is an advantage, but only when the startup uses it. A small company that refuses to test its beliefs can be less adaptable than a large company. Size alone does not create flexibility. A startup becomes adaptable by building learning into its management process. The ultimate purpose is to create a sustainable business, not to conduct experiments forever. Testing is valuable because it leads toward decisions. Each experiment should help the company choose whether to continue with its strategy, change an element of the business model, or stop investing in an idea that lacks support. A successful experiment does not always produce positive results. Evidence that disproves an assumption can be extremely valuable when it arrives early. Discovering after 2 weeks that customers do not care about a feature is painful, but discovering the same fact after 2 years is far more expensive. This requires a different emotional relationship with failure. The startup should not celebrate failure carelessly, because failed experiments still consume resources. But it should recognize that a well-designed test can produce progress even when the original belief is wrong. The key is whether the result reduces uncertainty. A failed launch that leaves a team confused is not useful. A small experiment that clearly shows why customers reject an offer may provide a valuable direction. The difference lies in the design of the learning process. Startup management therefore combines vision with humility. Vision gives the organization a reason to exist and a future worth pursuing. Humility allows the founders to admit that they do not yet know the correct path. Without vision, the startup has no direction. Without humility, it cannot learn. This combination protects the company from 2 common forms of failure. One is abandoning the mission too quickly, because early attempts are difficult. The other is remaining loyal to a flawed strategy because changing direction feels like defeat. Validated learning creates a disciplined alternative. The startup can remain committed to broader purpose while examining every assumption about how that purpose should be achieved. It can move forward with determination without pretending to possess knowledge it has not yet earned. The work of the entrepreneur is therefore not to predict the future perfectly. It is to build an organization capable of discovering the future through evidence. The startup must continuously turn assumptions into experiments, customer behavior into measurements, and measurements into decisions. When this process is working, the team is not simply producing more features or completing more tasks. It is moving from uncertainty toward understanding. It is learning what customers truly value, which parts of the strategy are weak, and what type of business can survive. That is the real foundation of progress. Before growth, scale, efficiency, and profit can become meaningful, the startup must first establish that it is creating something people actually want and that it has a credible path towards serving them sustainably. Everything that follows depends on this ability to learn before the organization runs out of time. Once a startup accepts that its most important job is to learn, the next challenge is turning that idea into a practical working system. Learning cannot remain a vague intention or a hopeful result that appears after months of effort. It must be built into the daily process of creating the product. The method used to do this is a continuous cycle in which the startup builds something, measures how customers respond, and learns what those responses reveal about the business. At first, this sequence appears straightforward. A company produces a product, collects information, and then decides what to do next. In practice, however, many startups perform these steps in the wrong order. They begin by deciding what they want to build, spend a long period creating it, and only afterward consider what should be measured. By that point, the team has already invested heavily in one direction. The measurements become a way to defend the product rather than test the assumptions behind it. A more disciplined approach begins with the learning goal. Before building anything, the startup should identify the most important question it needs to answer. It must decide which assumption carries the greatest risk and what evidence would support or challenge that assumption. Only then should the team determine what must be built in order to collect that evidence. This means the cycle is described as build, measure, and learn, but the planning often works backward. The startup first decides what it needs to learn. It then identifies the measurements that will provide reliable evidence. Finally, it designs the smallest product or experiment capable of producing those measurements. Suppose a company believes that busy professionals would pay for a service that organizes their personal finances automatically. The team could begin by building a complete platform with bank connections, financial dashboards, spending categories, investment recommendations, savings tools, and mobile applications. That could require a large amount of time and technical work. A better starting point would be to identify the main uncertainty. Perhaps the most important question is whether customers are comfortable giving a new company access to sensitive financial information. If customers refuse to connect their accounts, the advanced features will not matter. The startup could test this concern with a simple landing page, a limited demonstration, or a small manually operated service that asks early users to provide the necessary information. The experiment does not need to represent the final product. It needs to answer the important question. This distinction prevents the startup from confusing product development with learning. Building more is not automatically better. The right amount of build is the amount required to test the current assumption. The quality of the learning depends on the quality of the measurement. A startup should decide in advance what customer behavior would count as meaningful evidence. If the financial service receives many website visits, but almost nobody connects an account, the result challenges the assumption. If a smaller number of visitors join, provide information, and continue using the service, that behavior offers stronger support. Without predetermined measurements, founders can reinterpret almost any outcome positively. Low sales may be blamed on weak marketing. Poor retention may be blamed on missing features. Limited growth may be explained as a temporary problem. Some of these explanations may be correct, but if the team has not designed the experiment carefully, it cannot know which explanation deserves attention. The cycle, therefore, requires clarity. The startup needs a hypothesis, an experiment, a measurement, and a decision. Each pass through the process should reduce a particular area of uncertainty. The company is not merely collecting data. It is creating evidence that can influence strategy. Speed is important because the faster a startup completes this cycle, the sooner it can correct a mistaken direction. Yet speed should not be confused with rushing. A poorly designed experiment completed quickly may produce confusing information. A carefully designed test that isolates an important assumption can save months of unnecessary work. The goal is to minimize the total time required to complete the entire feedback loop. This includes the time spent developing the experiment, placing it in front of customers, collecting results, interpreting them, and deciding what happens next. Improving only one stage may not improve the overall process. A team might become extremely efficient at writing software, while remaining slow at releasing it to customers. Another team may launch frequently, but take weeks to examine the data. A third may collect information rapidly, but avoid making difficult decisions. In each case, the cycle remains slow because learning is delayed. The startup should examine every stage and remove anything that prevents evidence from reaching the people who make decisions. This often requires smaller releases, faster customer contact, simpler reporting systems, and closer cooperation between product, marketing, design, engineering, and leadership. Traditional organizations frequently divide these responsibilities into separate departments. One team creates a product, another markets it, and another analyzes performance. Information moves slowly between them. In a startup, this separation can be harmful because product decisions and customer responses are tightly connected. The people building the product should understand what assumption they are testing. The people speaking with customers should know what behavior matters. The people analyzing results should understand what was changed and why. When each group sees only one part process, learning becomes fragmented. This cycle also changes the purpose of product releases. A release is not simply a public announcement or a completed package of features. It is an opportunity to test beliefs. The startup should know what it expects to happen after each release and what result would influence the next decision. Many teams delay releases because they fear showing customers something incomplete. They worry that an imperfect product will damage the company's reputation or create a poor first impression. These concerns can be legitimate, especially in industries involving safety, trust, or regulation. But perfectionism can also hide a deeper fear, the fear of discovering that the idea is wrong. As long as the product remains unfinished, the founders can continue believing in its potential. Once real customers see it, they may reject it. Delaying the release delays that uncomfortable evidence. The team stays busy, but the most important risk remains untested. The lean approach does not say that every company should release a careless or dangerous product. It asks the startup to distinguish between defects that prevent valid learning and imperfections that merely make the team uncomfortable. An early product must be good enough to test the core value honestly. It does not need every feature imagined for the future. This leads to the idea of the minimum viable product. The phrase is often misunderstood because each word creates confusion. Some people focus on minimum and assume the goal is to build the cheapest or weakest product possible. Others focus on product and imagine that it must be a complete commercial offering. The real purpose lies in the word viable. The early version must be capable of producing reliable learning about customers and the business. A minimum viable product is the simplest version of an idea that allows the startup to begin the learning process. It is not defined by a fixed number of features. It may be a basic software application, a video demonstration, a manually delivered service, a prototype, a landing page, or even a direct conversation in which the founders attempt to sell the proposed solution. The correct form depends on what must be tested. If the main question is whether customers understand the idea, a demonstration may be sufficient. If the question is whether they will pay, the startup needs a real offer. If the question is whether the service produces value, the company may need to deliver the result manually before automating it. One of the best-known examples involves Dropbox. The founders wanted to create a service that would allow people to synchronize files across different devices. Explaining the idea was difficult because many customers had experienced unreliable file-sharing products and could not easily understand why the solution would be different. Building the complete system required significant technical work. Instead of waiting until every part was ready, the founders created a simple demonstration video showing how the product would work. The video was aimed at early technology users who understood the problem and could recognize the value of the proposed solution. The demonstration was not the finished service, but it tested an important assumption. It showed whether people who experienced the problem cared enough about the solution to express interest. The response increased rapidly, providing evidence that the demand was real. This allowed the founders to continue development with greater confidence. The example does not mean that every startup should create a video. The important principle is that the experiment matched the uncertainty. The founders needed evidence of customer interest before completing the difficult technical work. The demonstration provided that evidence more quickly than a finished product would have. Another form is the concierge minimum viable product. In this approach, the startup provides the intended service personally to a small number of customers. Instead of building a system that automatically performs every task, the founders manually deliver the result. Imagine a company that wants to create personalized meal plans based on a customer's health goals, schedule, food preferences, and budget. The final vision may involve software that collects information, analyzes nutritional needs, produces weekly menus, and generates shopping lists. Before investing in the complete system, the founders could work directly with a few customers. They could interview each person, create the plans manually, observe which recommendations are followed, and learn what difficulties appear. The service would be slow and impossible to scale, but scaling is not the immediate goal. The goal is to understand the value customers expect. This method allows the team to see details that automation might hide. Customers may care less about nutritional calculations than convenience. They may want meals that use familiar ingredients, require little preparation, or reduce food waste. These insights can shape the future product before the company builds expensive technology. A concierge approach can feel uncomfortable because it does not resemble the scalable company the founders hope to create. Yet this discomfort comes from confusing the experiment with the final business. The manual service is not meant to continue forever. It exists to reveal what the automated service must eventually accomplish. A related approach is sometimes called a Wizard of Oz minimum viable product. The customer experiences what appears to be an automated service, but people behind the scenes perform much of the work manually. The front of the product may look complete, while the internal process remains simple. For example, an online store might appear to use an advanced recommendation system. In reality, employees could review customer preferences and select recommendations personally. Customers receive the expected outcome, allowing the company to test whether the recommendations create value before building complex software. The risk in this method is dishonesty. The startup should not make false claims about capabilities that would affect trust or safety. The purpose is not to deceive customers about important facts. It is to delay internal automation until the company knows the result is worth automating. These early methods expose the founders directly to customer behavior. That exposure is valuable because it prevents assumptions from being protected by layers of technology. When a founder personally delivers a service, listens to complaints, watches customers struggle, and sees what they're willing to pay for, learning becomes difficult to ignore. The minimum viable product also challenges common ideas about quality. Founders often believe they know what quality means before customers have used the product. They assume that more features, cleaner design, faster performance, or greater technical sophistication automatically create a better experience. Customers may define quality differently. They may prefer a simple product that solves one urgent problem over a polished product that offers many unnecessary options. They may forgive an unattractive design if the result is valuable. They may reject a technically impressive product because it requires too much effort. The startup cannot know the correct quality standard entirely in advance. It must discover which aspects matter to customers. This does not mean ignoring professional standards. It means avoiding investment in forms of quality that have not yet been shown to create value. Early adopters are particularly useful in this stage. These customers experience the problem strongly enough to try an unfinished solution. They are willing to tolerate limitations because the available alternatives do not serve them well. A mainstream customer may expect complete reliability, easy setup, customer support, and polished design. An early adopter may accept manual steps or missing features if the product offers a new benefit. This makes early adopters suitable partners in the learning process. However, the startup should not assume that every preference of an early adopter will apply to the wider market. Early users may be more technically skilled, more patient, or more enthusiastic than ordinary customers. Their behavior can prove that value exists, but later development must examine whether the product can serve a broader audience. Launching an early product also creates emotional challenges inside the company. Employees may fear that customers will judge them for unfinished work. Designers may dislike releasing an interface that does not meet their long-term standards. Engineers may worry that temporary systems will become permanent. Leaders may fear negative publicity. These concerns should be discussed honestly rather than dismissed. The team should establish what must be reliable, safe, and respectful before release. It should also decide which imperfections are acceptable because they allow learning to begin. The startup may limit the experiment to a small group, a specific location, or an invitation-only release. It may explain clearly that the product is in an early stage. These choices can reduce unnecessary risk while still creating real customer interaction. The minimum viable product should not be larger than necessary, but it also should not be so weak that failure teaches nothing. If a customer rejects a product because it does not deliver the central benefit, the experiment may not be valid. The startup must include enough functionality for the value assumption to receive an honest test. Suppose a company wants to know whether customers will pay for fast online language tutoring. A website that merely describes the service may test interest, but cannot fully test whether the tutoring experience creates value. The company may need to provide several real sessions, observe attendance, and see whether customers return. The minimum is therefore determined by learning, not by effort alone. A very small experiment can be wasteful if it produces ambiguous results. A somewhat larger experiment may be justified if it clearly answers an important question. Founders sometimes resist this method because they believe a competitor will copy the idea. They worry that releasing an early version reveals their strategy before they are ready. In reality, the larger threat is often building something nobody wants. Ideas are usually less valuable than the ability to learn, adapt, and execute. A competitor may see the product, but it does not automatically gain the understanding the startup has developed through direct customer evidence. The company that learns faster can maintain an advantage even when its general idea is visible. Another concern is that early customers may dislike the product and never return. This can happen, but the startup must compare that risk with the cost of remaining ignorant. A small group of disappointed early users may be less damaging than a large public launch of a product that has never been tested. The team should choose experiments carefully and avoid exposing the entire market at once. The objective is controlled learning. By testing with a limited audience, the startup can discover problems, make improvements, and gradually expand. A minimum viable product also protects a company from becoming trapped by sunk costs. The more time and money invested in a feature, the harder it becomes to remove. People defend their work because abandoning it feels wasteful. Yet continuing to support an unwanted feature creates even more waste. Smaller experiments reduce emotional and financial attachment. If a hypothesis proves wrong, the company can change direction without feeling that months of work must be protected. This makes honest decisions easier. After an early product reaches customers, the startup needs a method for measuring progress. Ordinary accounting systems are necessary for tracking money, expenses, and revenue, but they do not fully describe the health of an improving business. A startup can have limited revenue while making genuine progress, or it can produce early sales while moving toward failure. The challenge is to measure whether the business model is becoming more sustainable. This requires innovation accounting, a system designed to show whether experiments are improving the startup's fundamental performance. Innovation accounting begins by establishing a baseline. The company releases its minimum viable product and measures how customers behave under current conditions. The results may be disappointing, but the purpose is not to create an impressive report. The purpose is to understand where the business actually stands. The baseline might include the percentage of visitors who register, the number of registered users who become active, the rate at which customers return, the average amount they spend, the number who recommend a product, or the percentage who stop using it. The correct measurements depend on the business model. A subscription service may focus heavily on retention and cancellation. An online store may focus on conversion, repeat purchases, and acquisition cost. A social product may need to examine engagement and invitations. The startup must identify the behaviors connected to value and sustainable growth. Once the baseline is known, the startup begins making changes designed to improve those measurements. Each experiment should target a specific part of the business. The team may simplify registration, change pricing, improve onboarding, modify the product's main feature, or focus on a more suitable customer segment. After each change, the startup measures whether customer behavior improved. If the numbers move in the expected direction, the hypothesis receives support. If they remain unchanged or decline, the team must reconsider its understanding. This creates accountability. Instead of reporting how many features were completed, the team reports whether those features change customer behavior. A feature that required months of work but produced no meaningful improvement should not be described as progress simply because it was launched. One of the greatest obstacles to clear measurement is the use of vanity metrics. These are numbers that increase over time and create a positive impression without revealing what caused the growth or whether the business is becoming healthier. Total registered users is a common example. The number almost always rises because it includes everyone who has ever signed up. It may grow even if most users leave immediately. The company can celebrate reaching 1 million registrations while having very few active customers. Total revenue can also be misleading when viewed without context. Revenue may rise because the company spends heavily on advertising, offers unsustainable discounts, or depends on a small number of unusual customers. The increase looks impressive but may hide weak retention or excessive costs. Vanity metrics are attractive because they support a success story. Founders can show charts that move upward, employees can feel encouraged, and investors may be impressed. The problem is that these numbers do not explain what action should be taken next. Actionable metrics connect cause and effect. They help the startup understand whether a particular change created a particular result. They're often less dramatic, but more useful. Cohort analysis is one way to produce actionable information. Instead of combining every customer into one total, the startup groups customers according to when they joined or what experience they received. It then compares the behavior of those groups. Suppose an online service launches in January and attracts 1,000 users. In February, it changes the onboarding process and attracts another 1,000. If the company looks only at total users, it sees growth from 1,000 to 2,000. Cohort analysis examines the January and February groups separately. It may show that 10% of the January users remain active after 1 month, while 25% of the February users remain active. This suggests that the onboarding change improved retention. The opposite result would also be valuable. If both groups behave almost identically, the new onboarding process may not have addressed the real problem. The team can stop assuming that the change worked and investigate other causes. Cohorts prevent later growth from hiding earlier weakness. A company may add new users quickly enough to make total activity rise, even though each group leaves at the same high rate. The business appears to be growing, but it is constantly replacing lost customers. This pattern is sometimes compared to pouring water into a leaking bucket. The company can keep adding more water, but sustainable growth requires repairing the leak. Cohort analysis reveals whether retention is improving or whether acquisition is merely covering the losses. Split testing, also called A/B testing, provides another method. The startup presents different versions of a product or offer to similar groups of customers and compares their behavior. One group may see a certain price, design, message, or feature, while another sees an alternative. The test helps isolate the effect of the change. If the groups are similar and the main difference is the experiment, the startup can more confidently connect the result to that difference. For example, a company may believe that customers avoid purchasing because the checkout process is too long. It can show one group the current process and another group a shorter version. If the shorter version produces a meaningful increase in completed purchases, the evidence supports a hypothesis. Split tests prevent decisions from depending entirely on opinions. A manager may prefer one design, a founder may prefer another, and a designer may support a third. Testing allows customer behavior to influence the decision. However, testing must be connected to meaningful questions. A startup can waste time experimenting with small visual details while ignoring major weaknesses in the business model. Changing the color of a button may slightly improve conversion, but that improvement is unimportant if customers do not return after first use. Experiments should focus on assumptions with the greatest effect on value and growth. The team needs to distinguish between optimization and discovery. Optimization improves a working system. Discovery determines whether the system works at all. A startup in the earliest stage usually needs discovery more than minor optimization. It must learn whether the customer problem is real, whether the solution creates value, and whether the business can grow. Small adjustments become more useful after these fundamentals are stronger. Innovation accounting also requires a company to avoid changing too many things at once. If the product, pricing, marketing message, and target audience all change together, improved results may be difficult to interpret. The team knows that something worked, but not what. This does not mean every experiment must be perfectly controlled. Real markets are complex, and startups often lack enough customers for ideal testing. Still, the company should design changes in a way that produces the clearest evidence available. The process moves through three broad stages. First, the startup establishes the baseline, using an early product. Second, it runs experiments intended to improve the key drivers of the business model. Third, it evaluates whether those drivers are moving toward a sustainable level. This third stage is essential because small improvements can create false confidence. A conversion rate may rise from 2% to 3%, but the company must ask whether that level supports a viable business. Improvement matters only in relation to the destination. The startup should understand what numbers would be necessary for sustainability. It may need a certain customer retention rate, acquisition costs, purchase frequency, or profit margin. These targets are estimates at first, but they help the team judge whether progress is meaningful. If experiments repeatedly improve the numbers and bring the company closer to sustainability, continuing the strategy may be reasonable. If the team makes substantial efforts and the fundamental measurements barely move, the evidence suggests a deeper problem. At that point, adding more features may not help. The startup may need to question its customer segment, value proposition, growth method, pricing, or other major elements of strategy. Innovation accounting is not intended to eliminate human judgment. Measurements can be incomplete, experiments can be affected by outside conditions, and customer behavior can be difficult to interpret. The method provides structure, but leaders still need to understand context. A sudden decline may result from a technical failure rather than a weak idea. A short-term increase may result from publicity that will not continue. Seasonal behavior may distort the results. The startup must investigate these possibilities rather than treating every number as final truth. At the same time, uncertainty should not become an excuse for ignoring disappointing data. Founders who strongly believe in an idea can always find reasons why the current results do not count. They may say the market is not ready, the product is too early, the customers are unusual, or the marketing is insufficient. Any of these explanations could be correct, but each should become a new testable hypothesis. If the founders believe the wrong customers were reached, they should test a different segment. If they believe the problem is onboarding, they should improve it and compare the results. If they believe customers need education, they should test a clearer explanation. This turns excuses into experiments. Instead of debating whether an explanation sounds reasonable, the startup looks for evidence. A useful measurement system should be simple enough for the entire team to understand. When data is controlled by a small group of analysts or presented through complicated reports, employees may not connect their work to customer results. Teams should be able to see how their changes affect the key measurements. This creates a shared understanding of progress. Engineers, designers, marketers, and managers can discuss the same customer behavior rather than relying on separate departmental goals. The numbers should also be auditable. People need to know where the data came from and how it was calculated. If a metric suddenly improves, the team should be able to examine the underlying customer records or events. This reduces the risk of errors and prevents arguments about whether the report is trustworthy. A measurement system that nobody understands cannot create effective learning. Good startup metrics often share three qualities. They are actionable because they show a connection between decisions and results. They are accessible because people across the organization can understand them. They are auditable because the underlying information can be examined. When these conditions are present, data becomes part of the company's decision process rather than a decoration added to presentations. Meetings can focus on what customers are doing, why the behavior may be changing, and what assumptions should be tested next. The feedback loop, the minimum viable product, and innovation accounting work together. The early product begins a cycle. Customer behavior creates the measurements. The measurements produce learning. That learning determines what the startup builds next. None of these ideas works well in isolation. An early product without meaningful measurement can create confusion. Measurement without a clear hypothesis produces large amounts of useless data. Learning without a decision does not change the company's direction. The complete process requires discipline at every stage. The startup must identify the critical assumption, build the smallest valid test, release it to real customers, measure relevant behavior, interpret the evidence honestly, and choose the next action. As the cycle repeats, the company gradually replaces guesses with knowledge. It learns which customers experience the strongest need, what solution they value, what prevents them from adopting it, what encourages them to return, and what kind of growth is possible. The product may improve, but product improvement is not the only result. The startup's understanding of the business improves as well. This understanding is a foundation on which future investment, hiring, marketing, and expansion should be based. Without it, growth magnifies weakness. A company that spends heavily to acquire customers before understanding retention may lose money faster. A team that hires employees before discovering a workable strategy may create more coordination and greater resistance to change. A business that expands to new markets before proving value may spread confusion across a larger organization. Learning before scaling does not mean remaining small forever. It means earning the right to grow by demonstrating that the basic engine of the business works. Once the startup has reliable evidence of value and sustainable customer behavior, larger investments become less speculative. The lean process, therefore, changes the meaning of patience and urgency. The startup should be patient with a long-term vision, but urgent about testing the assumptions that stand between the present and that vision. It should not demand immediate perfection, but it should demand continuous evidence. Each experiment should bring the company closer to a clear choice. The team must eventually decide whether the existing strategy is producing enough progress to continue or whether a major change is needed. The measurements do not make that choice automatically, but they prevent the decision from depending entirely on hope. The value of the method lies in its honesty. It forces the startup to face customer behavior before comfortable stories become permanent beliefs. It encourages small failures while they are still affordable and reveals weak assumptions before they consume the company's remaining resources. By building only what is needed to learn, measuring behavior rather than appearances, and treating evidence as a guide for action, a startup can move through uncertainty with greater discipline. It may still face risk, disappointment, and unexpected results, but it no longer has to depend entirely on prediction. It can discover the right product and business model through repeated contact with reality. That process does not guarantee success, but it gives the organization a better chance of building something customers genuinely value before time, money, and opportunity run out. After a startup has built an early product, measured customer behavior, and completed several learning cycles, it eventually reaches a difficult decision. The team must determine whether its current strategy is making enough progress to justify continuing or whether a significant change is necessary. This is the moment when the startup must choose whether to persevere or pivot. Persevering means continuing with the existing strategy because the evidence shows that the company is moving toward a sustainable business. Pivoting means changing an important part of the strategy while keeping the broader vision intact. A pivot is not a random reaction, a complete restart, or an emotional decision made after a disappointing week. It is a structured correction based on what the startup has learned. This distinction is essential because entrepreneurs often confuse persistence with refusing to change. Determination is widely admired in business. Founders are encouraged to believe in themselves, ignore criticism, and continue working when others doubt them. This attitude can be valuable when the company faces ordinary obstacles. It becomes dangerous when it prevents the founders from recognizing that their strategy is not working. A startup can continue adding features, improving technology, and increasing marketing activity while its fundamental customer behavior remains weak. The team may interpret every small improvement as proof that success is close. Since so much time and money have already been invested, changing direction can feel like admitting that the earlier effort was wasted. This creates a psychological trap. The greater the investment in the original plan, the more difficult it becomes to question that plan. Founders may continue because they do not want to disappoint employees, investors, partners, or themselves. They may also fear that a pivot will make them appear uncertain or incompetent. Yet refusing to change in the face of strong evidence does not demonstrate discipline. It demonstrates attachment. The purpose of startup management is not to protect the first idea. It is to discover a strategy capable of achieving the underlying vision. At the opposite extreme, some startups change direction too frequently. They react to every customer request, competitor announcement, disappointing metric, or new opportunity. The team constantly introduces new ideas without allowing any strategy enough time to produce meaningful evidence. This form of instability can be as destructive as stubbornness. Employees lose confidence because priorities change repeatedly. Experiments are interrupted before results become clear. The company never develops a coherent product or a deep understanding of any customer group. A pivot should therefore occur only after the startup has established clear measurements and tested its most important assumptions. Without that foundation, the decision becomes an argument between opinions. One person believes the company needs more time. Another believes the market is wrong. A third wants to add features. A fourth wants to target different customers. Because no shared evidence exists, the discussion becomes emotional and political. A well-managed startup creates regular opportunities to examine the strategy. Instead of waiting for a crisis, the leadership team reviews customer behavior, progress towards sustainability, and the results of recent experiments. These meetings should focus on whether the current approach is producing meaningful improvement. The startup needs enough time between these reviews for experiments to generate useful data, but not so much time that a failing strategy continues indefinitely. The correct frequency depends on the business, development speed, and customer cycle. What matters is that the decision is not postponed merely because it is uncomfortable. During a pivot or persevere review, the team should compare its current measurements with a baseline and with the requirements of a sustainable business. It should examine whether customer retention, conversion, revenue, engagement, or other important drivers are improving as expected. The question is not whether the product is better than it was several months ago. Most teams can improve a product with enough effort. The question is whether those improvements are changing customer behavior strongly enough to support the business model. A company may celebrate that its retention rate has increased from 5% to 8%. That improvement could indicate learning. But if the business requires a retention rate of 40% to survive, the company remains far from sustainability. The founders must decide whether further experiments are likely to close that gap or whether the current strategy has reached its limits. When the measurements improve consistently and the team understands why, perseverance may be appropriate. The startup can continue refining the product, strengthening its growth process, and investing in the strategy. When repeated experiments produce little movement, a pivot becomes more reasonable. A pivot is not necessarily a sign that the original vision was wrong. The vision may still be valuable while the assumptions about customers, product design, pricing, technology, or distribution prove incorrect. The startup changes one of these elements in order to test a new path. There are several ways a company can pivot. One is a zoom-in pivot. In this case, a single feature of the original product becomes the entire product. The startup discovers that customers care strongly about one part of the offering while ignoring the rest. A team may have built a broad business platform containing communication tools, scheduling, document sharing, reporting, and project management. Customer behavior may show that the scheduling feature creates most of the value. Rather than continue improving the full platform, the company may focus entirely on scheduling. This change allows the startup to simplify its message, improve the most valuable function, and serve a more clearly defined need. The feature that was once only one part of the vision becomes the new center of the product. The opposite is a zoom-out pivot. Here, the original product proves too narrow to create sufficient value on its own. What the startup considered a complete solution becomes one feature within a broader offering. For example, a company may create a tool that automatically produces invoices. Customers may like it but still need separate systems for payments, expense tracking, tax records, and financial reports. The startup may expand into a larger small business accounting platform in which invoicing is only one component. Another possibility is a customer segment pivot. The product solves a real problem, but not for the customers the startup originally expected. A company may target large corporations and discover that its strongest demand comes from small professional firms. Another may build a product for university students and find that teachers use it more consistently. In this situation, the startup does not necessarily change the basic product. It changes its understanding of who receives the greatest value. This can affect pricing, marketing language, product features, customer support, and distribution. A customer need pivot occurs when the startup understands its target customers, but discovers that the problem it intended to solve is not important enough. Through direct interaction, the company identifies a different problem that those same customers care about more deeply. A team may begin by offering a service that helps restaurant owners create attractive menus. While working with customers, it may learn that their greater difficulty is controlling food waste and ingredient costs. The company can redirect its efforts toward the more urgent need. This type of pivot depends on close customer contact. Had the team only measured menu design activity, it might have missed a broader financial problem. The new direction emerges because the startup develops a better understanding of the customer's situation. A platform pivot involves changing between an application and a platform. A startup may begin with one product designed for end users and later allow outside developers or businesses to build their own services on top of its technology. Alternatively, a company may begin by trying to create a general platform and discover that customers need a specific application before the platform has value. Platforms can be attractive because they promise scale and many possible uses. However, a platform without successful applications may have no reason for customers or developers to join. In some cases, building one strong application first allows a startup to demonstrate value and create demand for the broader platform later. A business architecture pivot changes the fundamental relationship between customer volume and profit. Some businesses depend on selling a small number of high-priced products to large customers. Others depend on selling low-priced products to a very large number of customers. A startup may begin with a consumer product and discover that the cost of reaching millions of users is too high. It may shift toward enterprise customers who pay more for a specialized version. Another company may begin with expensive consulting services and later create a standardized product that can serve a much larger market at a lower price. A value capture pivot changes how the company earns money. The product may create value, but the original pricing or revenue model may not work. The startup may move from one-time payments to subscriptions, from customer payments to advertising, from direct sales to transaction fees, or from a free service to paid premium features. Changing the revenue model can also change customer behavior and the product itself. A business funded by advertising may optimize for attention and frequent use. A subscription business may focus more heavily on retention and long-term value. The startup must consider whether the new model supports the experience it wants to create. An engine of growth pivot changes the main method through which the startup expects to expand. A company may initially depend on paid advertising, but discover that acquisition costs are too high. It may redesign the product to encourage customer referrals. Another may expect viral growth, but find that users do not naturally invite others, leading it to focus on retention or paid acquisition instead. A channel pivot changes how the product reaches customers. A startup may sell directly through a website and later work through retailers, distributors, app stores, resellers, or business partners. The product may remain similar, but the sales process and economics can change significantly. The channel must match the price and complexity of the product. A low-cost product usually cannot support an expensive sales team. A complicated enterprise system may require personal demonstrations and long sales conversations. The wrong channel can make a good product appear unviable. A technology pivot uses a different technology to deliver the same basic solution. This type of change is often more common in established companies because the customer problem and market may already be understood. The company adopts new technology because it is faster, cheaper, more reliable, or easier to scale. Technology should not be changed simply because a new tool appears exciting. The pivot makes sense when it improves a company's ability to deliver value or strengthens the business model. Technology remains a means rather than the purpose of startup. These pivot types are not strict rules. A company may make a change that combines several of them. Moving from individual consumers to large organizations may require a customer segment pivot, a pricing change, and a new sales channel at the same time. The value of the framework is that it helps founders identify what is actually changing. Rather than saying the startup is beginning again, the team can explain which assumption failed and what new assumption will be tested. A pivot creates a new set of hypotheses. It does not remove uncertainty. The startup must return to the same disciplined process of building, measuring, and learning. The new strategy deserves evidence just as the original strategy did. This prevents the pivot from becoming an escape from difficult work. A team might abandon one direction because progress is slow and become excited about a new idea. Without testing, that idea may be no stronger than the first. The purpose of changing direction is to improve the company's chances of reaching sustainability, not to renew enthusiasm temporarily. One of the most important benefits of early experimentation is that it makes pivots less expensive. When a startup has built only what was necessary to test its assumptions, it can change direction without abandoning years of development. Small batches of work preserve flexibility. A company that has invested in a large product hired a specialized workforce, signed long contracts, and built its reputation around one strategy faces much greater resistance. This is another reason learning should come before scaling. Once the startup finds a strategy that creates value, its attention increasingly turns toward growth. Growth is necessary because a startup cannot become sustainable by serving only a handful of early users forever. However, growth must come from a system that can continue rather than from temporary excitement. Many companies experience bursts of activity after a launch, media appearance, advertising campaign, discount, or partnership. New users arrive, revenue rises, and the team believes a growth problem has been solved. When the event ends, activity declines. Sustainable growth occurs when new customers are produced by the actions of past customers. This does not always mean direct referrals. Existing customers can contribute to future growth in several ways. They may continue paying, recommend the product, create public visibility through use, or generate revenue that funds the acquisition of additional customers. The mechanism that converts existing customer behavior into new customer growth is described as an engine of growth. Understanding this mechanism helps the startup choose the correct measurements and avoid mixing strategies that require different priorities. One engine is based on customer retention and repeated use. This is known as the sticky engine of growth. A sticky business grows when it acquires customers faster than it loses them. The central issue is customer churn, which refers to the rate at which users stop using or paying for product. If subscription service gains 100 customers each month, but loses 90, its net growth is only 10. Increasing advertising may bring more customers, but the business remains weak if most leave quickly. A sticky growth company should focus heavily on whether the product becomes part of the customer's routine or continues delivering value over time. The startup needs to understand why users remain, why they leave, and what changes improve retention. This engine is common in subscription software, membership services, financial platforms, communication tools, and products that customers use repeatedly. Growth accumulates because each new group of customers remains active while additional customers join. A business with strong retention can grow steadily even if customer acquisition is moderate. A business with poor retention must replace lost customers continuously. The difference becomes more significant over time. Suppose two services each acquire 1,000 customers per month. The first retains 90% of its customers, while the second retains only 20%. During the first month, their growth may look similar. After several months, the first service has built a large active base, while the second depends almost entirely on new arrivals. Total registrations would hide this difference. Retention measurements reveal which business has a functioning sticky engine. The startup should identify the natural frequency of product use. A tax preparation service may be used only once a year, while a messaging application may be used many times each day. Low daily activity does not always indicate failure. The correct retention period depends on the product's purpose. The company must also distinguish between customers who remain because they receive value and customers who remain because leaving is difficult. Contracts, data lock-in, and switching costs can reduce churn, but a business that depends entirely on trapping dissatisfied customers may damage trust and reputation. The strongest sticky products continue improving the customer's experience and become increasingly useful over time. Customers remain because the product deserves a lasting place in their work or lives. Another engine depends on customers bringing new customers into the product. This is the viral engine of growth. Viral growth occurs when use naturally encourages or requires people to invite others. Social networks are an obvious example. A communication product becomes more useful when a customer's friends, family members, or colleagues also join. An online payment service may spread when a user sends money to someone who must create an account to receive it. Collaboration software may grow when one team member invites the rest of the team. Viral growth should not be confused with public attention or popular marketing content. A video about a company may spread widely without producing lasting customers. True viral growth is built into the product's use. The important measurement is a viral coefficient, which represents how many new customers each existing customer produces. If every customer brings more than one new customer, growth can accelerate. If each customer brings less than one, the viral process may still support growth, but cannot sustain it alone indefinitely. Imagine that 100 customers each bring 2 additional customers. Those 200 customers then bring 400, and the cycle continues. This creates rapid expansion. If 100 customers bring only 20 additional customers, the product receives some referral benefit. But another acquisition method is still needed. The length of the viral cycle also matters. A product that produces referrals within 1 day grows faster than one that takes several months, even when the number of referrals per customer is similar. Startups using this engine should examine both how many people customers invite and how quickly those invitations occur. Attempting to create artificial virality can harm the customer experience. Products sometimes pressure users to share contacts, send unwanted invitations, or post promotional messages. These methods may increase short-term signups while creating annoyance and distrust. Sustainable viral growth usually comes from genuine value. Customers invite others because the product becomes more useful when they participate, because sharing is part of the experience, or because the result is worth recommending. The third major engine is paid growth. In this system, the startup uses revenue from existing customers to acquire new customers. Advertising, sales teams, partnerships, affiliate payments, and other paid channels can support this engine. 2 numbers are especially important: the amount the company earns from a customer over a relationship and the cost of acquiring that customer. Growth is sustainable when the customer's value is greater than the acquisition cost by enough to cover operating expenses and support reinvestment. Suppose a company spends $50 to acquire a customer and expects to earn $200 in profit from that customer over time. It can use part of that profit to acquire more customers. If the company spends $200 to acquire a customer who produces only $50 in profit, increasing the advertising budget will increase losses. Early revenue can make an unhealthy paid growth engine look successful. Sales increase because marketing spending increases, but the company is effectively buying revenue at a loss. Unless retention, pricing, or acquisition costs improve, the growth cannot continue without outside funding. This is why the lifetime value calculation must be based on realistic customer behavior. A startup may assume customers will remain for 5 years, even though it has only 3 months of data. Optimistic assumptions can make the economics appear stronger than they are. Paid growth also depends on the size and reliability of the acquisition channel. An advertisement may work well with a small audience and become more expensive as the company tries to reach more people. A sales method that depends on the founder's personal relationships may not scale to a larger team. The startup should test whether it can continue acquiring suitable customers at an acceptable cost. A single successful campaign does not prove that the engine is sustainable. Although a business may benefit from all 3 engines, it is often useful to focus primarily on one at a particular stage. Each engine requires different product decisions and measurements. A sticky engine emphasizes retention and customer loss. A viral engine emphasizes invitations, sharing, and the speed of referral cycles. A paid engine emphasizes customer value, acquisition cost, and the ability to reinvest revenue. Trying to optimize all three at once can create confusion. A team may add viral features that distract existing customers, spend heavily on advertising before attention is strong, or focus on reducing churn when the product's real advantage is rapid sharing. Focus allows the startup to understand which mechanism is expected to drive growth and whether that mechanism is working. Once one engine becomes established, the company may develop additional engines. The choice should emerge from customer behavior and the nature of the product rather than from fashion. Some founders want viral growth because famous technology companies have grown that way. Others depend on paid advertising because it creates immediate numbers. The correct engine is the one that matches how customers receive value and how the business earns money. Every engine eventually slows. A sticky product may reach most customers in its target market. A viral network may exhaust the social connections most likely to join. A paid channel may become too expensive as competition increases. The startup must watch for signs that the engine is losing power. Growth may decline even while the product remains valuable. At that point, the company may need to reach a new customer segment, create a new product, expand geographically, or develop another growth mechanism. This connects growth back to the pivot decision. If the engine cannot produce the level of growth required for sustainability, the company may need an engine of growth pivot. It may continue serving the same need while changing how customers are acquired or retained. The goal is not growth at any cost. Rapid expansion can hide serious weaknesses. A startup may add users faster than its system can support them, acquire customers who do not fit the product, or create expenses that revenue cannot cover. Growth should strengthen the business rather than increase the speed at which it approaches failure. This requires the same evidence-based discipline used during product discovery. The startup must understand why customers remain, why they invite others, or why their revenue supports further acquisition. When a mechanism is clear and repeatable, growth becomes more than a temporary rise on a chart. The decision to pivot or persevere and the choice of a growth engine are closely connected. Both require the company to move beyond surface-level activity and examine whether the strategy works as a system. A startup may possess a valuable product, but target the wrong customers. It may serve the correct customers, but use the wrong revenue model. It may retain users strongly, but have no effective method of reaching new ones. It may acquire customers rapidly, but lose them just as quickly. Each weakness requires a different response. Adding more features is not a universal solution. The company must identify which assumption is failing and choose an experiment or pivot that addresses that specific problem. This is why disciplined entrepreneurship depends on clarity. The startup needs a clear vision, explicit hypotheses, meaningful measurements, regular strategic reviews, and a focused model of growth. When these elements work together, persistence becomes more intelligent. The founders do not continue merely because they are emotionally committed. They continue because the evidence shows that the strategy is improving. Change also becomes more intelligent. The startup does not chase every opportunity. It pivots because the current measurements reveal a limit, and because a new hypothesis offers a better path toward the vision. The same principle applies to growth. The company does not celebrate every increase in traffic or registrations. It asks whether past customers are producing future customers through retention, referrals, or profitable acquisition. This creates a business capable of learning not only what to build, but how to survive. The product must create value. The strategy must adapt when evidence demands it. And the engine of growth must turn that value into a sustainable stream of customers. Without these elements, a startup may have creativity, hard work, and temporary attention, while lacking a durable business. With them, uncertainty does not disappear, but becomes manageable. The company gains a structured way to decide when to remain committed, when to change direction, and how to convert customer value into lasting growth. As a startup begins to understand its customers, improve its product, and develop a workable engine of growth, a new challenge appears. The company must learn how to increase speed without losing control. Early experimentation may have depended on a small group of founders making quick decisions, but growth brings more employees, more customers, more systems, and more opportunities for mistakes. The organization now needs a way to remain adaptable while becoming more reliable. One of the most useful ideas for achieving this balance is working in small batches. In traditional production, companies often assume that large batches are more efficient. If a team must create 100 units, it may seem sensible to complete the same step for all 100 before moving to the next stage. This reduces the number of times workers switch between tasks and appears to increase productivity. The problem is that large batches delay feedback. If an error occurs during the first stage, the mistake may be repeated across the entire batch before anyone discovers it. The organization completes a large amount of work, but much of that work may need to be corrected, rebuilt, or discarded. Small batches reduce this risk. Instead of completing one stage for 100 items, the team moves a small number through the entire process. Problems become visible earlier, corrections happen sooner, and less unfinished work accumulates. This principle applies directly to startups. A large product release may contain dozens of features developed over several months. When customers respond poorly, the company struggles to identify which change caused a problem. A smaller release produces clearer evidence. The startup can see how a specific change affects customer behavior and can respond before the mistake spreads through the entire product. Small batches may appear slower because the team releases less at one time. In reality, they often reduce the total time between beginning an idea and learning whether it works. The goal is not to maximize the amount of work completed during one stage. It is to improve the speed of the complete learning process. This requires teams to change how they define efficiency. An engineer may feel efficient when writing a large amount of code. A designer may feel efficient when completing many screens. A marketing team may feel efficient when preparing an entire campaign. But if the work waits for weeks before reaching customers, the organization remains slow. The most important measure is how quickly an idea can become a real customer experience and produce useful evidence. Small batches help the startup move through this process more often. In software companies, this approach can lead to frequent releases. Instead of saving every change or a major update, the company introduces improvements gradually. Some organizations release changes daily or even several times during a day. Frequent releases do not mean abandoning testing or responsibility. They require strong systems that detect problems quickly. Automated tests, monitoring tools, customer feedback, and the ability to reverse a change allow the company to release small updates with less risk. A large release creates a dramatic moment. If it fails, the entire organization may enter a crisis. A small release limits the damage. The team can identify the issue, repair it, and continue learning. This method also reduces the pressure to predict everything in advance. The company does not need complete certainty about a large plan. It can test one element, examine the response, and adjust the next step. The ability to release frequently depends on the structure of the organization. If every small decision requires approval from several managers, departments, or committees, the feedback loop slows down. Teams need enough authority to design experiments, observe results, and make improvements. This does not mean removing accountability. It means placing responsibility close to the people doing the work and giving them clear measurements of success. A team should know which customer behavior it is trying to improve and should be able to test ideas without waiting for a lengthy chain of permission. Cross-functional teams are especially valuable. Instead of separating engineering, design, marketing, operations, and customer research into isolated departments, a startup can bring the necessary skills together around one problem. When people with different abilities work toward the same learning goal, they can move more quickly. The designer understands a customer question. The engineer knows what must be built. The marketer knows how the experiment will reach users. And the analyst knows what must be measured. This reduces the delays that occur when work is passed from one department to another. It also makes it harder for any group to judge success only by its own output. Everyone shares responsibility for the customer result. As the organization experiments more frequently, mistakes will still occur. The goal is not to create a system in which nobody ever fails. That would discourage risk-taking and hide problems. The goal is to detect mistakes early, understand their causes, and prevent the same failure from repeating. One method for doing this is the 5 whys. When a problem appears, the team repeatedly asks why it happened. Each answer leads to another question until the discussion reaches a deeper organizational cause. Suppose a new feature causes the website to stop working. The first explanation may be that incorrect code was released. The team then asks why the incorrect code reached customers. Perhaps the automated test did not detect the problem. Why did the test fail? Maybe the system had no test for that type of error. Why was the test missing? The team may discover that employees have been pressured to release quickly without enough time to improve the testing process. The visible error came from one piece of code, but the deeper cause involved the organization's priorities and systems. Punishing the individual developer would not solve the full problem. Another employee could make the same mistake under the same conditions. The 5 whys encourages a company to respond at several levels. The immediate error is repaired, but the team also improves the process that allowed it to occur. This turns failure into a source of organizational learning. The method must be used carefully. If it becomes a search for someone to blame, employees will hide mistakes. The discussion should focus on systems, training, communication, tools, and decision-making rather than personal humiliation. At the same time, avoiding blame does not mean avoiding responsibility. People should acknowledge errors and help repair them. The purpose is to create an environment in which problems can be discussed honestly enough to prevent repetition. A useful rule is to make an investment at each level of the problem. If an employee made a mistake because training was unclear, the company improves the training. If monitoring was weak, the company strengthens monitoring. If a deadline encouraged unsafe shortcuts, leadership reviews how deadlines are set. These investments should remain proportional. A minor problem does not require rebuilding the entire organization. The team makes the smallest improvement that can reduce the likelihood of the problem happening again. This reflects the same lean principle used in product development. The company should not create a large system based on imagined future risks. It should respond to real evidence and improve the process continuously. For this reason, adaptability is not a temporary phase that ends once the company finds product-market fit. Markets continue changing. Competitors appear, technology develops, customer expectations shift, and growth engines eventually slow. A business that stops learning can become vulnerable even after early success. The company therefore needs to build innovation into its long-term structure. It must be able to manage existing products efficiently while continuing to explore new opportunities. Large companies often struggle with this balance. Their systems are designed to protect successful products, meet predictable targets, and reduce variation. These systems are valuable for stable operations, but they can make new ideas difficult to test. An innovation team may be required to provide detailed revenue forecasts before it understands a customer. Managers may compare its early performance with established departments. The team may be pressured to produce immediate profits or may be prevented from releasing an experiment because the early product does not meet the company's normal standards. Applying the same management rules to established operations and uncertain innovation creates poor results. The new project needs accountability, but the accountability should focus on learning rather than accurate prediction. An innovation team should identify its assumptions, create a minimum viable product, establish a baseline, run experiments, and show whether customer behavior is improving. It should receive enough independence to move quickly while remaining connected to the wider organization. This arrangement can create tension. Existing departments may see the new team as receiving special treatment. Employees responsible for the main business may be judged by revenue, costs, and deadlines, while the innovation team is allowed to experiment and sometimes fail. Leadership must explain that the teams perform different kinds of work. One operates a proven system, while the other searches for a new one. Both require discipline, but the correct measurements are different. The startup approach does not suggest that every project deserves unlimited time and money. Innovation teams must still demonstrate progress. If repeated experiments fail to improve the important measurements, leaders must be willing to pivot or stop the project. The difference is that decisions should be based on evidence rather than on whether the team followed an impressive plan. A project that misses its original forecast but discovers a valuable new market may deserve further investment. A project that meets development deadlines but attracts no customers may not. Successful innovation also requires protecting experiments from the full weight of the established brand. A large company may fear that an unfinished product will damage its reputation. It can reduce this risk by testing with a smaller group, using a separate brand, or clearly communicating that the service is experimental. The organization needs a pathway for successful experiments to grow. A small innovation team may prove that customers want a new product, but the idea can still fail if the wider company cannot support it. Processes for funding, hiring, marketing, compliance, and operations must eventually help the project scale. This transition should happen gradually. If the company applies large-scale systems too early, it can destroy the speed of the experiment. If it waits too long, the project may remain too small to create meaningful impact. The broader purpose is to create a company that can repeatedly produce innovation. Instead of depending on one brilliant founder or one successful product, the organization develops a system for discovering new value. This requires a culture in which assumptions can be challenged. Employees should be able to ask whether a project is truly helping customers, whether a measurement is meaningful, and whether an existing strategy still deserves investment. It also requires leadership to separate failure caused by careless execution from failure produced by an honest experiment. A careless mistake should be corrected. A well-designed experiment that disproves an assumption should be recognized as useful learning. Without this distinction, employees learn to avoid risk. They choose safe projects, hide negative information, and protect themselves with detailed plans. Innovation becomes performance in which everyone pretends to know more than they do. A lean organization accepts uncertainty openly. It does not use uncertainty as an excuse for disorder. It creates systems that make uncertainty manageable through experiments, measurements, and regular decisions. The deepest message is that entrepreneurship is not controlled by perfect prediction. No founder can know the future with complete confidence. Customers may behave differently than expected, and an idea that appears brilliant in theory may fail in practice. What can be managed is the process of learning. A startup can choose to test its most dangerous assumptions early. It can release a simple version before investing in a complete system. It can measure real behavior instead of depending on compliments and forecasts. It can examine whether changes improve the business and decide whether to persevere or pivot. It can also build growth around a clear mechanism rather than temporary attention. It can improve its organization through small batches, rapid feedback, honest problem solving, and continuous adaptation. The purpose of all these practices is not simply to make companies faster. Speed without direction can increase waste. The purpose is to reduce the time between having an assumption and discovering whether it is true. A startup begins with vision. That vision gives the founders a reason to continue when the path is uncertain. But vision alone is not enough. The strategy must face reality, and the product must change when customer evidence demands it. The most successful entrepreneur is not the person who predicts every detail correctly at the beginning. It is the person who creates an organization capable of learning what it does not yet know. This changes the meaning of failure. Failure is not automatically valuable, and it should not be celebrated carelessly. But when a small, well-designed experiment reveals that an assumption is wrong, the discovery can protect the company from a much larger loss. It also changes the meaning of productivity. A team is not productive merely because it works long hours, completes many features, or meets a launch date. It is productive when its work reduces uncertainty and moves the company toward a sustainable business. The final standard is simple but demanding. The startup must prove that it is creating something customers value and that it can continue delivering that value while growing responsibly. Every method in this approach serves that goal. Validated learning separates evidence from hope. The feedback loop turns ideas into experiments. The minimum viable product begins learning before perfection. Innovation accounting reveals whether customer behavior is improving. The pivot protects the vision from a failing strategy. Growth engines explain how value can become sustainable expansion. Small batches and the 5 whys help the organization remain adaptable as it grows. Together, these ideas offer a disciplined way to build under uncertainty. They do not remove risk, guarantee success, or make entrepreneurship easy. They help founders avoid the most wasteful failure of all, creating a product efficiently, professionally, and passionately that people never truly wanted. A business becomes stronger when it is willing to replace assumptions with evidence. It becomes more resilient when it can change its strategy without abandoning its purpose. It becomes more capable of lasting when learning is not treated as a stage before growth, but as a permanent part of how the organization works. The goal is not to follow a perfect plan. It is to build a company that can discover the right plan through contact with customers, honest measurement, and repeated improvement. That is how an uncertain idea can gradually become a product people choose, a system that can grow, and a business capable of creating value over the long term.